that I know Representative Wilkerson was expecting maybe some more folks from the Cobb delegation to come on. But just to give an introduction of what's going on, why we're doing this today, David has reached out to me. We've known each other for a while, and he's reached out to me with some concerns and interests regarding the elections. And I kind of explained to him my role, but I think he wanted our conversation to be a little bit more public to the entire delegation so everyone is aware. Overall, our goal today is to really see what we can do to make elections in Cobb County. We're all on the same page there. We're all on the same Cobb team and bring all the parties together. For those who don't know, I'm a Director of Public Services, William Tanks. I play a support role for the Department of Elections. I want to emphasize, I do not have any executive authority over the Department of Elections. They have their own board, and I'm honored today. We have members from the Board of Elections here. There's 5 of them that are on that board, I believe. And then they are that authority, as you know, not the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners and myself, our role is more of a support. We're a funding source. However, in a support role, and as a citizen of Cobb that lives in South Cobb in District 4 and has that double tie with Representative Wilson, I have an interest in doing whatever I can to help us be successful in our elections, the upcoming runoffs and the November elections. But again, I want to emphasize, I am not the authority. I don't have I can't tell the Department of Elections, hey, get this many ballot boxes. I can't tell them, hey, get this many early voting. That's not my role. That direction comes from the director and the Board of Elections. But they are here, so I'm not trying to get out of anything. They're here to speak for themselves. The role of the Cobb Board of Commissioners, the Board of Elections, I will explain that just in case anyone knows. The Board of Commissioners has a broad role over all kind of government except for the Board of Elections, of course, and Board of Education. And it's obvious by their nature, they won't have authority over the elections department because they are elected officials. That's why we have a Board of Elections. Those Board of Elections members, 5 of them, one is appointed by the Cobb Republican Party. Another one's appointed by the Cobb Democratic Party. 2, from what I understand, are appointed by the Cobb Legislative Delegation, and then 1 by our Cobb Chairman. Is that correct, Chairman Bill?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. So, in general information, before we allow questions and stuff to hear, I told Dave what I would do was give an update. And Representative Wilkerson, do we have most of your delegation on, or do you want to wait and maybe go to some more less important stuff?
I think several have logged on already, so you can go ahead. This is being recorded as well, right?
I believe it is with on Cobb TV. I would have to check with our technical team.
No.
I think Chairman Phil, you were muted. Say it again.
I was told that I asked about that earlier. I understand it is being recorded, and it should be available, I think, on YouTube. I don't know about the other formats.
All right, thanks. General information, some of this stuff everybody's aware of, but just to put it out there. The timeline of what I know Representative Wilkerson mentioned the amount of money the Cobb Board was given to handle COVID stuff. The timeline of that money, it actually came available a week after we had already decided to get the boxes. I have dates on that, and I'll be glad to send anybody email on that. I know that was a question you had, why did we not get ballot boxes? But again, that's the director, Janine Eveler, is not here. She is nose to the ground getting ready for the next wave. But the board is here. But what she does is tell me what they want to do and what they're going to do. And then what I do is try to support that with staffing. And then I'll go to the Board of Commissioners for funding. That is the extent of my role. So when they tell us, hey, we need 4 mail-in boxes, then I'll go try to make sure she gets the money. We did that but I believe I saw an email from Janine where they are trying to make sure they get more boxes. We're checking locations now that meet the standards for those ballot drop-in boxes. And so that is in place. So we're going to increase that. We did have the issue of a diminished workforce plus the increased work. When I say diminished workforce, I don't know if people realize it, but a good portion of elections employees are seasonal employees, day workers, delivery drivers, equipment testers, poll workers, and we contract out technicians. So you're looking at about 90 seasonal workers. And when COVID-19 hit and you don't have full-time employees carrying out this work and then poll workers, we took a hit on employees and kind of scrambled. I think everybody's made aware of that. We lost a lot of employees, seasonal employees, because frankly, they didn't want to come out or they didn't feel it was safe to come out. And now I believe the government has just extended the state of emergency. My chuckle says everything. So we are not out of this. Theoretically, we all knew that COVID would disrupt the elections, but I will say experience is the best teacher. There was no way we could predict some of the human factors. No way. Of course, we couldn't tell the weather. And I tell you now, social distancing does not like elections. The two don't go together. That I actually went out to District 4 myself. I live in South Cobb, just to get on the ground and help out and support. And they were trying these social distancing rules. They just it's like putting a square in a circle. It just didn't work. And that is something we thought out theoretically, but we had no experience. Now we have experience. Now we've seen things that we couldn't have predicted. I believe that there were lessons learned and the team is going to make those adjustments. Overall, although there were mishaps, and I know that everybody's aware that a lot of it was concentrated, there was more in District 4 than other places. Overall, things went well, relatively well for Cobb elections. What lessons did we learn? Virtual training may be healthy, but it's ineffective. That's just being honest and real. You can't teach somebody how to use a machine by watching through a Zoom or WebEx machine when they need to put their hands on it. So the virtual training was a good idea. It was the priority was health, but again, it didn't go with our election system. We in the county, again, our role is a support, not an authoritative or an executive. We realized that county employees, if we could lend county employees to the election department, that would help her with the loss of some of those seasonal workers, and we did exactly that. We had some of our employees from the Department of Transportation, from the Public Safety. We had employees from one of the commissioner's office. We let employees go out, hit the ground, and put boots on the ground, worked at polls, and they did great jobs. We had a couple of them become poll managers. We are looking at that model now, since we can't really control or manage seasonal workers as we would like to. We're starting to tap into our Cobb employees. That's a support role that I can play, and that's something we're committed to doing. Our current logistical setup with the Cobb new equipment, the way we're set up right now with our buildings, the way they're just located, one is up in Kennesaw, of course, one is in Marietta. That proved to be a challenge to us also. And the reason I say that, when you add the printer, you add the scanner, and you add this other equipment that goes with the new voting system, we had more equipment to store, and then it was challenging. So our current setup for logistics, I would say, is not adequate. We are working on that also. The unintended consequences of the paper voting system, human error. I mean, paper marks, folks maybe not being coloring in the lines. I know that sounds elementary, but some people didn't color in the lines, and that kind of stuff causes issues. And some out of precinct voting, there were some issues there. We mentioned areas of improvement. There's our logistical support and some restructuring. That's a support, and I want to emphasize support. She tells me what they need, the Board of Elections decide what they're going to do, and then my role as a director is to help her get that done. recruitment of skilled poll managers and dedicated poll teams. That's an area that we want to improve in. We got to recruit poll workers because now you're using iPads, technologies, QRS scan codes. That may sound simple, but you get someone on a poll machine and say, hey, I want you to download this link on your phone, take the QRS code, take a picture of it, and then it uploads a machine. I had to do that myself at one poll. I can tell you, and I don't know any other way to say this. My uncle, 75 years old, would have said, here, he would give it to somebody else. Not everybody wants to deal with all this new technology because they may not have grown up with it. So that was some issues. And so we want to make sure that we can look at some technical skills when we provide Janine and her and the Department of Elections support. The delivery teams, I'm not sure if anybody's aware, we used to rely heavily on Cobb firefighters, but because of a lawsuit, we lost all our firefighter drivers. So we had to rely on volunteer drivers. And literally the night before the elections, we had 4 drivers call in and say they were not coming in. I ended up driving trucks and delivering equipment. And they laughed at me because I had a suit and tie on. And said, are you the delivery guy? And I said, yeah. So I had to take that off because I look kind of not professional with the suit and tie on. So we lost drivers there. Also in 2019, if we look at poll locations, we lost, I think it was 31 schools with active shooter things going on in schools. The schools have just gotten to where they want to be safer. And so I won't say we were evicted, but Janine was not able to secure, she lost 31 schools in 2019. All these type of things, they make it challenging. It's not something we can overcome, support. The resources we're looking to secure logistical equipment, satellite storage space. That means spaces beyond the main place and of course some temporary warehouse space. Challenges that we're facing. We don't own the poll locations. If we go to a church, we go to someone's community center, we go to any facility, we have to ask people, can we use their facility? The other day I had to send one of our welders from one of the county departments to fix a rail at a church because we were accused of breaking it and doing some landscape. So when you get to that, folks are very peculiar about you letting folks come on their property. And with COVID-19, there was even more fear. So we wish we could control more poll locations, but we have to cooperate and work with people. Thankful a lot of the good churches mentioned. I know that Fulton is doing this mega poll place. I don't know if the board will look at that. The Board of Elections will look at that, or Janine will look at that. But polling places under COVID were also a challenge, and we know we got to find better places. Here's where we can use the help from the Cobb delegation. Of course, understanding that the Board of Elections is probably who you should direct most of your requirements or requests for changes to, because I don't have the authority, neither does the Board Commission. We just support. But recruitment of poll workers. I've seen people get on YouTube and other places and talk about their experience at the voting place. I would say those are probably the most motivated folks to come in and make sure these poll places run well. If you know someone that has concern, ask them to contact the Department of Elections and become a poll worker so that they can help these polls be successful. Getting the word out, we could use help there. Educating voters. I was at a poll and I watched a gentleman say he didn't want to vote Democrat or Republican, so he asked for a partisan ticket. And then he realized he couldn't vote for any of the people he wanted to vote for. That was just something he didn't know. No one explained to him. And if I didn't know any better, I don't want to vote Democrat, Republican. I want to vote for the best person. Give me a nonpartisan ticket. Well, then all you end up with is judges. So voter education is something I think all of us can do to help voters understand. There are a lot of nuances with elections, and I mean a lot of nuances, that it would help to inform and educate people way ahead of time, almost on an education blast. And then finally, securing early voting locations with poll workers. If we can get help and leverage in places, and you can just we can always screen them and vet them and see if they were appropriate, they meet the requirements. But space to have polls would be helpful because our network is bigger than an individual. So that was an update, very brief. Just kind of ran through that, but I want to turn this over to comments to the Board of Elections. Let them make comments. They are, again, the authority. And then at that point, Representative Wilkinson, we can entertain questions. So at this point, Chairman Field or anyone from the Board of Elections, if you care to make comments, please do.
Yes, sir. I'll lead off, and we'll see if some of the other board members have comments as well. I appreciate all the remarks that you had, and I think that is sort of set the stage for some of the information about some of the situation that we have, some of the problems that we have. And as you pointed out, with this coronavirus, COVID-19, or however it's termed, that came at a time, in fact, we were running the early voting for the presidential preference primary in March when we started having to shut down. So we had 2 weeks of early voting, and then we had to completely close off the third week of that early voting. And then there were also changes that were made by our government, on what the dates would be as far as the postponing the date and postponing the date again type of thing, to where we ended up in June with the presidential preference primary combined with our regular primary situation. And that caused some confusion. I know I had people that contacted me who had gotten absentee ballots by mail and were going to fill them out. And the lady called me and she said, well, her husband on his, it had presidential race on it, but hers didn't have it. And I said, well, did you vote in the early voting? She said, yes, I did. I said, well, you voted then and you can't vote twice. So that's why you didn't have it on yours and he had it on his, because he didn't vote in it earlier and he gets to vote now. So there's a lot of education that we do have to have for our voters, and anybody on, I know our board always tries to do that. I know I always try to do that. And I'm sure our state representatives and senators would like to do that as well. A lot of them have their own websites, their own email chains and so forth. And if they can put out information about that, and also maybe take a few minutes, as Bill mentioned, to explain the nonpartisan ballot. That's another thing I know I have received phone calls about. My name and phone number is listed on Cobb's elections website, which is fine. And it happens to be, since I'm the chairman, it happens to be the first one you see on there. So I get calls sometime, but they think they're calling the office, but they're calling me. And that's fine. If I can help them out, I do. If not, I get the information for them or refer them on. But one of the things that caused some difficulties was the absentee ballot mail out that we had. There may have been some confusion here in Cobb County because our election staff had decided early on that they wanted to go ahead and mail out ballots to all the over 65 voters, registered active voters in Cobb County, and they started that process. And then the state afterward decided they were going to mail them out to all the registered voters in Georgia. And the situation was that the vendor the state used got theirs mailed out first. And so people got one from the state, and then if they're over 65, they got them from Cobb County. If they were under 65, they only got one. But with all those absentee ballots out there and the uncertainty of this COVID virus, a lot of people went ahead and applied, filled out the application, got an absentee ballot. But then as time came closer to election, they really wanted to vote in person. And so they decided that's what they would do. And when they show up at the polls, if they have their absentee ballot with them, then it has to be a situation of canceling that absentee ballot. And that takes a few minutes to do. It's not just a 1 minute thing. And some of them show up and they say, oh, I don't know where that is. I left it at home or whatever. And they don't even have the absentee ballot. So that makes a longer process of them having to fill out paperwork for an affidavit swearing that they had an absentee ballot, but they're not voting it and they will not be voting it. And I don't know all the details of what's in there, but they have to do that. That takes somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 to 10 minutes to do. And when you're down with poll workers already, polling locations that we should have 6 or 7 workers at, and you may only have 3 or 4. And a lot of those have not had any in-person training to handle those situations. So the time it takes to do that backs up the line as well. And I would like to say too, I know Bill mentioned living in South Cobb, District 4. I live in South Cobb, District 4. I'm in House District 41, sitting in District 33. And I voted absentee myself. And I used one of the drop boxes. And I think that worked out very well. Hopefully we'll be able to have more of them. I would want to point out that there are standards to using those drop boxes set by the state, and as to what the size of the box is and so forth. You know, you have to order them and special for that. And also the location that you put them in. They are required to have video surveillance. Well, we had locations that had some video surveillance, and we were able to use those for the 4 that we used in Cobb County. I used the one down on Austell Road at the county government center down there where the fire and police station is. Very simple, drive up. Did have to get out of the car because of the fact that they have 2 concrete posts in front of it, you know, to keep somebody from running into it. But that worked out good. Hopefully we'll be able to get more, but they do require the video surveillance. So we would have to have locations that have that, or that's going to be another expense to add the video surveillance in order to do that. And so many of our workers that we've had, the temporary poll workers that are just, you know, there on just a few days before election and after training earlier, then those people, a lot of them are more elderly people, and they were concerned about this COVID virus. So we had a lot of them that were planning on working, but then they dropped out, you know, sort of at almost the last minute, and we had to try to get other people to help. So those are some of the things we face, and I will be quiet for a while here and see if any other board members have any comments they'd like to make, or if some of the questions that we might have, that we can see if we can answer those. Thank you.
Yes, this is Fred Aiken. I'm responding by audio only. And I hope the folks can understand now from the comments from Bill and Phil, plethora of difficulties that occurred on election day, and hopefully through lessons learned that this can all be corrected. And we do need help, and those people that experienced difficulty at the polls, hopefully they can come forth and volunteer to help us out in the August election, and then again in November. And I think that pretty well covers what I have to say, because Bill and Phil have really covered it well.
Good morning. This is Neera Ball. And I was going to say that Mr. Tanks and Phil covered everything so well. And we're all aware of the challenges we went through. My question is, how do we communicate these kind of details to the constituents who don't understand what we went through? So how well, I mean, we respond to the emails that we get. Janine is so good at it. But what's the mechanism? How would we communicate those challenges that we went through to people so they understand that it's not on purpose, not intentional? We've never seen anything like this before, and we basically had to think on our feet and try to do the best.
This is Jessica Brooks, and I think that I'm feeling the way I was at the end of our certification meeting on that Friday, when I stated explicitly that even though we have done the very best I think that we could under very difficult situation, that our voters are not looking for excuses from us or necessarily reasons. At this point, I believe that what they're looking for, and what I hope that our state legislators may be able to find a role in assisting, is solutions. I would like for Phil Daniel to share information that we were given yesterday at our recertification meeting about some plans for improvement for the August runoff, because the state actually has prescribed certain things that we can and cannot do, and unless there are changes from the top, there still would be certain things that we can and cannot do. For example, the Dropbox, using Dropboxes was really given through permission of the state. And so we will be having a meeting tomorrow. I understand that's on the agenda to once again have the State Board of Elections say, yes, use Dropboxes and these are the stipulations. But I would very much at this point for Phil to represent us in sharing improvements and maybe have David Wilkerson, if he would address what he thinks, because he and I are in constant conversation, what role our legislators can play in partnering with us for these improvements.
You, Jessica, I'll be glad to share that. Yes, we have some points here that we discussed yesterday. And training and procedures, we will be providing in-person voting equipment training of 2 to 3 workers per poll. In the past, what we've had is at least one person from each poll that gets trained on actually using the equipment. But the equipment, of course, has changed due to the fact that there are more pieces of equipment and more to be done in setting it up, which also contributes to delaying opening polls in some cases. We want to have more people trained on that, which will help speed that up. Also provide additional video training on emergency ballot procedures. And you may ask, well, what are emergency ballot procedures? That is when the machines aren't working. If they're not set up or they can't be, other than just stopping voting, then you have a procedure to go through where you use paper ballots. And so that's a process that people need training on for that. Consolidating the emergency ballot supplies to make it easier to implement in a hurry. That's one thing we ran short of in some cases was the emergency ballots. Enough of those paper ballots, because it was unexpected that there was going to be that type of problem with those machines. And delivery, that was mentioned. Mr. Tanks mentioned some of that and how he helped out in driving one of them. And he's the only one that was required, I think, to have a coat and tie. Everybody else more casual. But we want to add more days to the poll delivery schedule. I think we started somewhere in the neighborhood of a week ahead of time this time. But one of the things that's involved with this, there are more pieces of equipment. Before, you had one self-contained box that had a station in that you could bring into the polling place. And there were a certain number of them that would fit in a truck. Well, it didn't quite realize that with this one, you've got the printer, you've got the machine, you've got these UPS, these power supplies that you have to have. I think it takes one of those for every 2 machines. And so you can't put as many into the truck. And handling them is a little hard too. Those power supplies, I think, weigh over 70 pounds. And we have to reduce the number of stops per route so that we can recover if a stop does get delayed. And we had some, like we had, I know, a breakdown on the night there before election too of one of the trucks. And preloading trucks on the day before so we can start earlier. And implementing a new communication plan to get the delivery information from the drivers and provide updates to the poll facility contacts. This is where they'll know when their equipment's coming in, keep up to date on that. And we plan on adding a new position to double check the supplies as they're being loaded on the delivery trucks to make sure that they've got all the pieces that they need for that voting location. The space requirements is another area. The county, as Bill mentioned, I'll say this, as Bill mentioned, we have a location in Kennesaw, and that is a warehouse location. And that's where the election equipment is stored. And also where our ballots are returned on election night to be assembled and then transported to our main office on Whitlock, where they are entered into the computer system. And we also have, of course, our main office there. The county's provided 2 off-site storage facilities to relieve the testing and prep space, because you need space for that. Every time we have to test those machines before every election, you have to go through a procedure on that to make sure they're operating and recording correctly. And we'll continue to use also, which we have, Jim Miller Park Event Center. That was used this last time for the absentee mail. We had such a huge volume of it, we had to have the space to be able to go through that absentee mail and get it counted. And also, one thing I mentioned we had there too as well is Bill mentioned a little bit about people not coloring in the lines, as he put it. And if you've had an absentee ballot, or maybe a test in school or something, you have a little oval space you're supposed to fill in, but not get outside of. And you're not supposed to put a check mark or an X. You're supposed to fill it in. Well, unfortunately, we have quite a few people that did not abide by that. And so if that's the case, we try to check and see if there's a way we can count that ballot. And it has to be transferred to a clean ballot. It takes two people to do that, to verify and make sure it's done correctly. And then that ballot could be scanned. Also, if someone tears a ballot or something or wrinkles it up too much, it won't go through the machine to be read. And you have to make a duplicate there. And that is a very labor intensive. It takes the space and the people and the time. Absentee balloting, the state vendor is mailing 40 to 50,000 rollover absentee ballots. Those are ballots for the people who are elderly and disabled. I know when I got mine, there's a little space down at the bottom of the application. You check if you're over 65 or if you're maybe not over 65, but you're disabled. And if you qualify on that, they will automatically mail you your absentee ballot for the next elections. So I did mine that way. I'm over 65, so I did that. So that means that I will be able to get mine mailed to me automatically. I won't have to apply again for the runoff coming up on August the 11th for the November the 3rd election, and which if we have to have one in January on federal, I would get that automatically because that's all in the same election cycle. And here our Cobb County office will mail all the other absentee ballots out. And we'll begin processing the returned absentee ballots as early as it is allowed by the state election board rule. So when they meet tomorrow, if they change that rule, allow us to start processing them earlier. They had them earlier this last time. If they do it early again, or maybe even an earlier time, that we can begin some of the process on those. We would not be tabulating the vote, we would be processing it. Then there's a technical aspect too. One thing that was a surprise that we ran into, that our staff ran into, was adding in the voting information from the state of the updated voter base. And that is done by downloading it. And we found out that it takes additional bandwidth to upload that voter file. That's done Saturday prior to the election. That's so we've got the database there is up to date as of that Saturday before when someone shows up to vote to see that they are a registered voter. And we've now going to have the additional bandwidth to be able to handle that. There had to be some special arrangements for this, and that caused delays this last election. At the polls, there may be some changes on the polls. We've got some of them, as Bill has mentioned about, that we don't own those spaces, that people are letting us use them. And if they decide they don't want to have us there for the COVID or something like that, or some other reason, then we have to change. And we're going to be making one or two changes necessary for August. One of them will probably be at Vining's 03 precinct, another one at Sweetwater 02 that we expect. And those will be presented at our July the 13th meeting. So those are some of the items that we had. We will have early voting for August 11th, before August 11th. That'll begin in July. And the first 2 weeks, there'll be 3 weeks of early voting. First 2 weeks will be at our main office on Whitlock. And then on the last week, we will have the main office and 4 other locations. So we'll have 5 locations then, and we will be adding more locations before November. For that one, we hope to have, I think, as many as 10 at that point. So I will be silent here for a while and see if any other board members have any comments or anything else.
Hey, if there are no other Board of Elections members that will speak, I think this will be a time for the delegation to go and ask questions. If you all wish, was there Daryl Wilson? Was he going to have make a comment?
I'm here. I'm just going to be quick. I'm not going to make a long comment. as you know, we went over the same things that Phil just explained, and the issues and things that we're going to be doing in the upcoming runoff and November elections. I could add another suggestion that wasn't added during that time. I know that we receive information. We can receive information from our bills, our electric bills. I think that's as a SPLOST, as a something that the community can, if they want to pay for a new polling location, or if they want to, if we want to disseminate poll changes, I think that's a good method on the electric bill, so that the citizens can know that, the district or the current location that they live in, they can, be knowledgeable that their polling place has changed. And maybe, some of the information that was discussed about the nonpartisan ballot, I understand that there was a lot of confusion concerning that, and people not being able to vote for who they wanted to vote for, but wanting to be. I think the explanation between bipartisan and nonpartisan needs to be explained on a large scale as far as voting, and that's pretty much it. Those are my solutions, and I'm gonna pass it on.
Could I thank Daryl for bringing up the thought that we could explore more creative ways to communicate with our voters as well as educate them. And I think he gave a good example. So that's something that we really need to explore, because we have our parties doing it. We, in many cases, have our faith community members doing it. We have candidates doing it. But I think the county can assume some more responsibility for, as I say, more creative ways of doing it. And even where the drop boxes are concerned, Janine shared with me that one approach that had been suggested by actually we have a very diverse staff. Even though we have maybe older poll workers, we have a very diverse staff at Whitlock. And there had been a suggestion to use our fire stations for drop boxes, because they already have security measures. So thank you, Daryl, for reminding us that there are some other perspectives and some other things we can consider.
That can help.
Hey, before we go on to let the delegation ask questions, if I can ask each one of the Board of Elections members to tell, if it's appropriate, who were you appointed by, just for the sake of context?
And I can lead off on that. I was appointed by the Cobb Legislative Delegation. I've been appointed 2 different times. I'm on my 2nd term. We can serve a 4-year term when we're appointed. I did fill out someone else's term to begin with, and then I was appointed for a full term and then another full term.
This is Neera. I was appointed by Jason Shepard, Cobb GOP chair, last year.
This is Fred Aiken, and I was appointed by the Cobb delegation, and my term of office runs parallel to our chairman, Phil.
And this is Jessica Brooks. I was appointed by the Democratic Committee of Cobb County, and I'm in the first year of my 2nd term, because the 4-year terms are renewable one time.
My name is Daryl Wilson Jr., and I was appointed by Mike Boyce, County Commissioner.
All right, thank you, Board of Elections. Representative Wilkins, at this point, we'll stand down and let you address questions to the Board of Elections or whoever you feel appropriate.
Thank you for doing this meeting and giving the update. I'm imagining this will be the first of at least 2 conversations. I think this one kind of brings us up to speed on some of the issues, and I know we have other issues as well. So I'm going to ask just one quick question and then let the other delegation members give some questions. But is the general thought from the Board of Elections that we will still be dealing with the COVID crisis come November? Will it be heavier, will it be lighter, or will it be the same? Because I think that drives a lot of what your planning is going to be.
Well, we certainly don't don't have any more knowledge on that than anyone else does. I know today I heard that, I believe it was as of yesterday, that our governor has extended the emergency order that he had, which covers some things. And I'm not sure exactly how much that's going to affect us as far as elections go, but I think they still want to have social distancing and they want more people to wear masks. And the distancing caused some slowdown, of course, in voting. And if that's continuing, if we're having to keep people separated in line, if we're having to have stations further apart, I think we heard so much from voters that complaints about the length and so forth, that we may have the voting stations in a poll location closer together than we had them previously in this last election. Get more machines in, because that has limited us on some of the locations as to how many machines we can have in place. And so if that answers that question to some degree. Someone else may have another comment that might be more knowledgeable than mine.
Well, I think this is Fred Aiken, and I think planning for the worst and hoping for the best is the situation that we're going to have to abide by, and make every means possible, if the worst does occur, that we're prepared for it.
And I'm very much in agreement with what Fred is saying, that COVID-19 is not going away, and we will not be relieved of it by November. And even if there's progress, that perception of our voters is going to be very important. So we will have to plan, I think, for the worst. We have not really discussed that in detail, David, but we will have to do that for November.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because in being surprised once, being surprised twice is upsetting, but I've heard several times, and not from the board, but from just general throughout, that we are caught off guard. And so I think I agree with the standpoint of planning for the worst, and that assumes that you'll have limited poll workers, that the virus will hit the same time the flu season hits, and that we plan accordingly and ask for those resources. Because while the board is meeting tomorrow, the state board, has Cobb put a request in for absentee ballot boxes, or are they just waiting to see what happens? Are we being proactive in asking for that request, or are we just going to see what they give us?
I think that Janine, our director, has been talking with the state about it, but I think it's kind of waiting to see what they will allow us to do as far as the number of boxes we can have. And of course, as Jessica has mentioned and others have mentioned, we also have to have the video surveillance security. That's one of the requirements the state has on it. And this part about fire stations, I think, may be a very good point. It might be good locations if we can have them. However, we got to keep in mind too that I think these things costing somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6,000 a piece.
Correct. And I think I've said, and this is the last comment, is that the county was given $132 million by the federal government to deal with COVID. That is a small piece to save people's lives or to save a couple of hours in line. So I think, if we could spend $6,000, we could buy 10 of them. It's still not even hit a rounding error on $132 million. And then every city hall I'm assuming every city hall has a camera outside, and we can space those appropriately. But I will go ahead and turn it over to any other delegation members that have questions.
David, Janine is looking at some fire stations for additional boxes.
Yeah. Do any other delegation member questions? Okay, then I'll keep going. And feel free to jump in. The absentee ballot applications, it was very successful this time. If the county does not mail them, then we run the risk of every group on the planet doing their own thing. And so if I am a independent voter, I could potentially get an absentee ballot application from the Democrats, from the Republicans, and from two candidates. Is that a concern that we're seeing, or Are we just willing to, because right now, political candidates can send an absentee ballot application with a political mailer and then the person's information filled out. And it puts into their partisanship. And like I said, is if that is the county's take, then I think each party will have to do it upon themselves. But you do run the risk of getting multiple conflicting ballot applications.
Yes, I can just say that I understand what you're saying on that. And I know I've seen some in the past that have been mailed out by political parties. That's an application. And of course, we have no control over whether a political party or candidate decides to mail out those applications. And if someone mails an application in, fills one out and sends it in, then of course they're only going to get one absentee ballot. That's all. The first one that they mail in, if it's is all completed properly, then they will have that ballot mailed to them at their registered address. But there would be only one. If they send in multiple, they're not getting more than one. It may cause some confusion on people's part, but we don't have any control over that.
Well, and I think that's where the question's coming in, is if there was confusion with the Secretary of State sending them out and the county sending them out, is there going to be even greater confusion when, two candidates, two political parties, and, send out applications because they want to make sure their voters are coming out? I think, is that going to be an issue that we're dealing with in January when people are calling the Board of Elections asking why they got multiple applications? I'm just curious why the county is not going to invest in something that I think would shorten the lines, and people are getting the process of voting by absentee.
David, is that actually an ask on your part?
That is an ask. It is an ask that the county send them out to everybody. I think that would be, basically, if we know COVID is here and we know that seniors are not going to want to come out and not going to want to work the polls, and we know that we're going to have a hard time getting poll workers, is it better to refine the process that we started with absentee ballots and to do it that way versus every party going into their, voting application and sending out ballots on their own, some of which may have the information that the state needs and some of them that they don't? Because I know that's always been an issue, is that anybody can create an absentee ballot and it may come to the Board of Elections, which is going to cause more heartache than otherwise. And I think we have 400,000, how many active voters do we have in Cobb County?
We have
about 450,000 active voters in Cobb County.
Okay.
And I would say, since I have been talking about voter education since I joined the board, that our voters expect us to address their needs, and confusing them the way they were confused during the primary because of the absentee ballots that came out from the Board of Elections. After the absentee ballot applications came out from the state, was a nightmare. You mentioned the party sending out absentee ballots, the candidates sending out absentee ballots, the variety of absentee ballots. Cobb counties does not look like the states. So I think that we're trying to best serve our voters. And if the ask is that we at least consider sending out absentee ballot applications for the voters who are not part of that group of that's something that we need to consider. We have not spoken about that yet. We have not as a board had conversation about that.
Okay. If we have some people on the line who are trying to unmute themselves, they're on the phone, how do they do that?
Yolanda, can you answer that question?
David?
Yes.
As I understand it, I know I'm using my phone, and I have 4 buttons at the bottom, and one of them is the microphone, which is black whenever it's on my phone, and if I hit it, it'll turn red, and I'll be muted at that time.
I think they may be just calling in and not on video.
Yes, the people who are on the phones are not able to unmute themselves, but if we can indicate what their numbers are, perhaps we can.
Okay, do you want the whole number, the last four?
This is Dawn. Who is it that's trying to speak?
We have someone at Representative Mary Frances Williams. She's last four of her phone number is 3485.
So I actually need the first 6 digits.
Oh, the first 6. Okay, and then you get a whole phone number 404-395.
Okay, I am not seeing that phone number, but you said it's Mary Williams?
Yeah, Mary Frances Williams.
Okay, I will make her a panelist, so I'm going to move her so she will be able to speak.
Okay. Okay, so we got a couple that I thought were panelists that are not able to unmute.
I think David,
Yes.
Mary Francis.
Okay. Go for it. There.
This is Representative Mary Frances Williams. I actually serve on the House Governmental Affairs Committee, and so we handle all the voting legislation and heard hours of testimony, starting with Secretary Raffensperger, poll managers from around the state, poll workers, and citizens. We did not hear from anybody in Cobb, but Janine Evler was really helpful in terms of staying in touch with members of the Cobb delegation and answering questions kind of as things unfolded afterward. So I have a few questions. First of all, we're talking about absentee ballots. The Secretary of State has announced that he is not going to mail out applications this time in November. Is there, have you made a decision about whether or not the county will mail out applications? Somebody's in the kitchen. Hello?
Let's go ahead. I don't know where the noise is coming from, but go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Can y'all hear me? Or okay. So my question is there are there discussions? Are you talking about? I know you talked about mailing out absentee applications or maybe ballots to voters 65 and older, and those are disabled. Has there been a decision about mailing out absentee applications on a wider basis? That's one question.
We at the Cobb County Board have not discussed it at this time. One thing was, as I think has been mentioned, there will be a state election board meeting tomorrow. And we were waiting to see what kind of decisions they might make along anything like that. So we wouldn't have a conflict.
Okay. Well, I don't know what'll be said at that meeting, but Raffensperger stated emphatically in front of the House Governmental Affairs Committee that he would not be mailing out applications in the future. And then, you talked also about the difference between provisional and emergency ballots. And one of the things that we heard here in Cobb and in other places was that I think the poll workers were confused about the difference, and some poll workers ended up using provisional ballots in the place of emergency ballots, even when people had their ID. So I think the difference between, I think there needs to be better training for the staff about the difference between provisional and emergency ballots, and also it needs to, I need to make sure that there are plenty of emergency ballots on hand if there are problems going forward with the machines. Well, just to be safe anyway.
Well, I don't know where you heard what I discussed early on or not. Were you able to tune in at that time?
Yes, I've been in the whole time.
Okay. Well, I'll repeat though that we're going to be consolidating emergency ballot supplies to make it easier to implement those in a hurry. Last time, as you mentioned, we were not prepared to handle as many of the emergency ballots as we had because we had not anticipated that many of the machines not being ready. As you may know, because of the delays in getting the machines operating on election morning in several of the precincts, and quite a few of those were in the South Cobb area, in District 4 area, we had to use more emergency ballots than normal. And so we were going to have more supplies on hand and be able to implement those in a hurry better than we have in the past.
Okay, that's good. I also think, based on some of the things Janine shared with us and we discussed, was there's confusion among some of the poll workers, including there was a poll manager in South Cobb who seemed confused about provisional ballots, and I also think some people were actually denied a provisional ballot. So I think in general there needs to be some retraining around, you know, you have to give somebody a provisional ballot if they ask for one. You're not supposed to be turning them away. So I just think there needs to be more training of perhaps the poll managers. Then, I mean, in all of this, you know, this is information with pop-up problems that Janine shared with us and we discussed. Then, so are you open to more early voting locations? I don't think that this is something that is controlled at the state level. I'm asking if the Cobb Board of Elections is open to more early voting locations.
We would like to if we could, but the problem is, like right now, we don't have enough time to secure and get those set up. And we had such a shortage of workers too. And that's part of the main problem we've got to get here, is to get people working at the polls to have enough to work. If someone is over 16 years of age and is a Cobb County resident or an employee of Cobb County, then they are allowed to work at the polls. And we would welcome more people. And the training you mentioned, that's very important. That's a key factor. But the problem is, you know, we had a lot of those people on election day this time in June that did not have that training. We had some people that had not gone through any training, that had to be hired at almost the last minute to be able to fill in positions at the poll. And we're only trying to go under the guidance of someone else there at the poll who had experience in training. And that's hard to do whenever you're trying to run an active election that day.
Mary Frances,
Yes.
this is Jessica. During the time that I have been on the board, we have, I want to say, made very small incremental changes in the number of advanced voting locations. And I think that, well, beginning with what Phil had reported earlier, that we currently have reservations for 10 satellite advanced voting locations, including some of those, because the first week we've always had Whitlock open. Our plan had been this time to have Whitlock open and I think one other the first week. The second week we had an additional 4. We could have probably had, but at least 10 satellite locations would be available. Second through. But again, I think that Janine's intent is to increase those voting locations, and I do think that we have to consider more advanced voting locations. We need to consider trying to get our voters to come out before the last 3 days of the last one, whatever way we can. I think we have to work with absentee voting as much as possible to get people, to keep people safe. So yes, I think that we are open to opening up as many as we can with the resources that we have.
Well, and I know that we had a meeting with the Cobb delegation, had a meeting with Janine at the Capitol during the first part of the session.
Mm-hmm.
And she had said that one of her one of the problems was finding locations. And at that meeting, the mayor of Smyrna was actually present, and he at that time offered the Smyrna Community Center. I think that there are, in other words, there perhaps are locations, government locations, that have not been explored that are an option. And I think in Atlanta, it's just been announced they're going to use stadium, one of the stadiums for early voting. So I think I do agree. I do agree that people tend to wait till the end, but I live close to the Whitlock office, and they, towards the end, I think the waits there were like 4+ hours, which
They were.
so people, so people clearly are indicating a desire for absentee ballots and for early voting. And I agree there are hurdles and there are problems. I think between now and November, we should have the time to be able to work those out. And I just think we need to respond to the desire and of the voters. And then I have one other question, because I know some of the, this is all a work in progress. So I understand that precinct changes are being considered, and including splitting my home precinct, Marietta 3A. And I do agree. I don't think there were problems at all or waits at Marietta 3A, but I do agree that it is a split that makes sense. My question is, what's going to be the deadline for precinct changes? I mean, I think if the sooner you make those, the better. But I think there needs to be a deadline after which, I mean, if that you stop making them and you don't continue to make them, say, possibly perhaps August, so that voters are not confused. They're not voting in multiple places. So what is the decision about the deadline for making any precinct changes?
I know they have to be made early enough for us to be able to give a 30-day notice of mailing out the new precinct cards to people to notify each individual voter about the change that's there. The only ones that I have on the list that I have in front of me right now are the ones that I mentioned earlier, which is Vinings 03 and Sweetwater 02. That'll be coming up in our July meeting. Beyond that, I don't know the names of any of those that are being considered, but I understand there were some, as you mentioned, that were going to be considered for splitting to try to reduce the waits in the lines.
Well, and I think we have to do everything we can to help the voters. I'm just saying, let's not drag this out. If you're going to make the changes, let's go ahead and make the changes. And I mean, we've been looking at lists where, and David, you can chime in, but we've been looking at lists of splits since January. So if you're going to make those splits, I think you ought to go ahead and make them now rather than later. That's my point.
Well, thank you.
I just heard from Janine that the deadline for changes is 90 days by law.
That's right.
That we were just talking about. Yes.
However, that law allows to make changes if an emergency happens. So I think in the current situation, emergencies. So like Sweetwater 02 was a week. So I guess we just need to make sure that people always check before they go, because we moved from Presbyterian Village. I think it was a week before.
Well, and my point is, we've been looking at a list since January.
That's right.
So if you're going to change them, I don't understand why. I mean, I'm just going to say, if you're going to change them, change them. If not, don't. But we've been looking at a list since January, so I think the Board of Elections must know which locations you want to change. And if the changes are delayed until closer in November, I just think that doesn't make sense if you already know that you want to change them.
Mary Frances, you are completely correct, and I am sure that we will be looking at those lists that you're discussing, because there was a lot of controversy with the last round of changes, and I completely agree that if what we're hearing now, in light of what our experience has been during the primary, then we need to go ahead and make those changes as soon as possible.
Okay, I want to make a comment. I don't really have a question. I think Mary Frances asked, and David asked some of the questions I had. This is Representative Eric Allen. I just want to say that we've heard that you want to plan for the worst, but there's a lot of passive talk. Planning for the worst is not waiting on the Secretary of State to see what he's going to do about mail-in applications. It's creating a plan as if you're going to have to send mail-in applications. Planning for the worst is not waiting to see what we're going to do about early voting locations. I'd like to see us commit to those 10 early voting locations as soon as possible and say that they're going to be open for all 3 weeks. I just think that there are some things that we can be committing to if we're truly going to say that we're planning for the worst. Whether it materializes as the worst or not, I think this is a situation where we could all agree that it's best to be prepared and somewhat underutilized than to have the situation like we had for the primary. So as you guys have your meetings and you go through it, I would just encourage you to truly plan for the worst, which means to get out in front of it as early as possible, to even consider, how we pay poll workers. As Representative Wilkerson said, there's a lot of money that the county was allocated for COVID response. I don't think there's any more important response to COVID with federal dollars than securing and protecting our elections. So I would love to see more proactive and less passive conversation as you guys put things in motion and prepare for November's.
Well said. Representative Roger Bruce is on the phone. Is there a way we can unmute him? I can give you the number when you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
678-428.
All right. He is unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for the conversation, but the question I have is, we are looking at this crisis coming back, well, actually getting worse. And as it gets worse, people begin to panic. All indication is that public buildings, like schools are supposed to be opening back up and some other things opening back up. And all indication is if they do open back up, then people are going to get sick. And if they get sick, then those buildings are going to close back down. And so all this is going to be happening at the last minute as we lead up to the election. So to Eric's point, if we're going to plan for the worst, let's be realistic in our thought process. We know it's going to be worse because people are doing things that all the history is showing us will cause this virus to come back in strong form and therefore, close down buildings. So if we're going to close these buildings and we're not going to have access to them for various and sundry reasons, what is the backup plan?
In that case, if they, go ahead, Jessica, if you want to speak.
No, the backup plan, that I know that we all realize that we have to consider is absentee voting, the drop boxes that we have, and as much early voting as possible, as early voting process as possible.
Okay, so if that's the backup plan, and we're not going to be sending out the ballot early, like we did the last time, then that's not a backup plan.
We as the state, but our board here in Cobb has not had the conversation about, although I have asked many questions, but not during a meeting, about our sending out applications and adequate absentee applications and adequately educating our voters about what we're doing and what they should do. So I think we're clear.
Yeah.
I think all of the board members are clear on what we're being asked to do, I think.
Okay. Well, this is my last comment. It's what I'm asking for people to do is for us to just go ahead and plan as if the worst is already here because we know it's coming, and send out as many applications as early as we can for people to be able to get absentee ballots And if we can go in on election day and vote, great. But if we can't, we've already given people the other option, which is to mail them in. So that's just my suggestion, is that we assume that the worst is already here because we know it's coming.
And Mr. Tanks, our funder, is hearing what we're saying.
You got to laugh out of me on that. not in a demeaning laugh, but maybe bigger than life there.
Yeah, this is Fred Aiken on the audio, and just allow me to speak just for a moment. This has been a very healthy and very timely conversation, and I think we all agree that it's been helpful, and I think we would all agree that it behooves us to be proactive beginning now, and that's my comment.
Hey, Representative Wilson, it's now 11:11. I think the overall goal that you set out initially was to bring together the party of the Board of Elections with the delegation, and just to have this conversation and again, overall mission being doing what's best for Cobb, all of us, all part. So as we get ready maybe to wind it down, I want to make sure that no one's left out. Anyone had a chance to speak. We'll let you kind of close it out, Representative Wilson, with any comments, questions from your team. And I think the delegation can speak for themselves. But from my part, I'm glad everybody got a chance to come together and talk. And that'll be my final comment. And Dave, we'll let you close it.
Okay, like I said, I view this as the first conversation, and I think we got the consensus that we need to plan for kind of the worst. We didn't harp on the problems that we face, and so I appreciate that, because I did get a chance to visit a lot of the early voting locations, and I visited some of the ones that had problems, and I visited some of the ones that didn't have problems. So when people said they were able to vote without problems, I believe them. And when they said they were able to vote, but it was a lot of problems, I believe them. And I think it's important that the board hear that, because I know I visited the epicenter and people waited in line the whole time. And then I got in my car and drove to the North Cobb Senior Center and got a number and went in my car and made a phone call and drove around for a little bit and then came back and got in line and voted. So the one other request would probably be to have consistency in our locations. There was not a consistent practice on the early voting locations. And I think if we do that, then I think that will alleviate a lot. I think I called the county when there was a thunderstorm coming and there were a ton of people waiting out. I mean, at the epicenter, at the same time, COVID testing was going on. I mean, it was like every possible thing you could imagine going on at one location. And so I think those consistencies. So what I would recommend is that we kind of formalize our requests, kind of similar to what we did before the election, and to see where those are, because what I'm hearing right now is that the delegation is pretty consistent in believing that we should have, voting by mail is probably the best possible solution. And then we can expand on that education process to make sure people fill in the circles and do what they can. That we have more ballot boxes. I think every city hall should be a possible location, and it sounds like there's some good ideas. But I think the one additional request was that we be a little more proactive and not take what the Secretary of State gives us, but give recommendations, because I think we are a leader in the state as far as how to do an election. Yes, we have our problems. Yes, those problems are huge if you're the person waiting in line for a couple hours, but I think we are about solutions in Cobb, and I think we need to use that leverage to actually drive the conversation versus being reactive to it. And I think if we do that, then I think we could have a successful election, because while we counted provisional ballots this time, when there were errors because we weren't sure, that's not going to happen in the general. There's going to be a fight in a competitive general, and it will become more partisan. That's why we need to make sure the Board of Elections is actively engaged and do what we can to head those off. But like I said, thank you, and I appreciate the conversation on getting started. And thank you, Tanks. I know we talked quite a bit last week, that week of the election. I know I talked to Jessica. I was talking quite a bit. So I appreciate everything you guys are doing. That's all I have to say. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say.
I just wanted to say this opportunity. I think I'm hearing myself feedback or something. Appreciate this opportunity to be able to participate and with those of the delegation who were able to participate with us as well. And I wanted to commend our workers in our election staff with Janine and all of her staff. And I don't think anybody works any harder than she does as far as trying to make sure everything's right and we have the best opportunities for people to vote and to have the shortest lines as we can. And I heard it mentioned about the lines in South Cobb and what has been the wait times down there. I would like to point out, which I had not really considered that much, we have more Democratic voters in South Cobb than we do in other parts of the county. And the Democratic ballot, I know in that area, I live down here, had more Democratic races going on, or competitive races, that they had more choices to make. And also the questions that the parties are allowed to put on the ballot. The Republican Party, I think, had 4 questions on it. I understand the Democratic ballot had about 12 questions on it. So the length of time it took to vote the ballot is a factor as well. And that also should be considered.
I have to always push back on these things. I don't think that we have done any type of formal investigation or consideration of what those factors are that created the issues in South Cobb, because the first thing that I did when I saw we were closing 19 later, I just went down and I counted. I said 11 of those are south, definitely, or south-ish. So some of us have had conversations about things that have happened. We don't know whether the truck drivers quit that we're going to be delivering them. We don't know. We don't know what the factors are. And so I don't want to start in on the length of the ballot or any of that, because we have not done the type of investigation about that or consideration of that we probably can and should do. So I close and I thank everyone for this opportunity.
All right, Representative Wilkins, I think for the sake of time, I got a feeling you're going to want to do this again. But,
you got that right. And I'll say this, when we send the letter, please realize that the points we put, that the information we put out is not to attack, but to really, engage and think about steps forward. So that letter will probably be a little more in detail as far as the issues that we saw. And I think we've touched on them, people going to get a provisional ballot instead of emergency ballot, those kind of things. So really just kind of check, and then the expectation would be that we kind of come back as a Board of Elections and say, this is what we're going to do to fix it. So, and I think that, so like I said, the letter may say harsher than what the conversation is, but because this was really about, like I said, just kind of getting on the same page. And I do want to thank the whole board for serving. I know serving on a board and serving on a nonpartisan board. And like I said, we are fortunate that there was no legislation floating around to get rid of y'all, like there were in some other counties. And there was no attack either, because we did have some problems, but I believe that we can fix those problems, and that's the tack that we will always take in Cobb County.
Yeah, no, it was a very productive and positive meeting. I think a lot came out of it that we need to work on as well. So thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
all right, I think we can shut it down at this point, Representative. Well, thank you all. That concludes our meeting. If our virtual team would go ahead and close it out. Y'all have a good day.
And you too.